To believe the open road is a sanctuary of freedom is the most dangerous deception whispered into the heart of the modern wanderer. You imagine the endless asphalt ribbon as a path to escape, a way out, but I have seen its true nature in visions that leave cold ash on my tongue. The highway is not an escape. It is a gullet. It is a long, dark throat that swallows lights, sounds, and sometimes souls, digesting them in the belly of forgotten miles. Each white line is a tooth in a jaw that never stops chewing, and the rumble of an engine is not a song of liberty, but a prayer hummed by a man in a steel coffin, hoping he is not the next to be consumed. They are not journeys, they are offerings. The men who drive these steel beasts, these truckers, are the priests of this lonely religion. They offer their fatigue, their solitude, their fading memories of home to the insatiable god of the road. They believe they are masters of their domain, kings of their rumbling cabins. A fatal mistake. They are merely the blood cells flowing through the veins of a vast, unfeeling creature. And sometimes this creature dreams. It conjures mirages from heat and exhaustion, phantoms from spilled oil and dried blood. It whispers through the static of the radio, wearing the voices of lost loved ones. These are not mere stories I am about to tell you. They are the fever dreams of the asphalt serpent, and you are about to feel its cold skin against your own. Our first descent into this abyss begins with a man we shall call Javier. He was not a poet nor a philosopher. He was a man made of calluses, diesel fumes, and a quiet desperation that clung to him like the scent of stale coffee in his cab. He drove, not for the love of the journey, but to outrun the silence of an empty house, the ghost of a laugh that no longer echoed in his hallways. His truck, a hulking beast of chrome and rust he called El Devorador, the Devourer, was his only confidant. It was within this grumbling metal shell that he sought refuge, believing its thick walls could keep the whispers of his own regrets at bay. He did not know that the road has its own whispers, far older and hungrier than his own. He was cutting through the spine of the desert, a place where the moon hangs like a bleached skull and the stars are chips of ice in a black, empty socket. The heat of the day had bled out, leaving a profound and unnerving chill that the truck's heater could not touch. It was on a stretch of road so straight and so empty, it felt like a scar on the face of the planet that he first saw her, a figure, thin and wavering in his high beams. A woman standing by the side of the road, one thumb extended in a gesture of pathetic hope. Every instinct, every cautionary tale traded at truck stops like greasy currency, screamed at him to keep driving. But something in her stillness, in her utter defiance of the desolation around her, snagged his soul like a fishhook. He slowed the great beast, its air brakes hissing like a nest of snakes. He was not a fool. He kept the doors locked, rolling the passenger window down just a crack. The cold that flooded the cabin was immediate and unnatural. It was not the cold of the desert night. It was the cold of a crypt, a damp cellar cold that smelled of wet earth and something sickeningly sweet, like wilted funeral flowers. She approached the window, and her face was a mask of porcelain perfection in the harsh glare of the cabin light. But her eyes were pits. They were twin voids that did not reflect his lights, but seemed to devour them. She didn't speak. She simply stared, a faint, sad smile playing on her lips, a crack in the perfect mask. Javier felt a paralysis creep up his spine. The engine's comforting rumble seemed a universe away. His hand, resting on the gear shift, felt like it was carved from lead. The woman leaned closer, and the scent of decay intensified, thick and cloying. A whisper slithered through the cracked window, a sound that was not made of air, but of pure, distilled sorrow. It said his name, not shouted, not spoken, but breathed into the core of his being. It was a sound that knew him, that knew the empty house he was running from, that knew the name of the ghost whose laughter he still chased in his dreams. It was the moment he understood. This was not a person, it was a hook, baited with his own grief, trolling the lonely depths of the highway for souls to drag under. With a surge of adrenaline that felt like fire and ice, he slammed his foot on the accelerator. The devourer roared in protest, tires screaming as they tore away from the spectral trap. He didn't look in the passenger side mirror. He didn't dare. He stared straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He drove for what felt like an eternity, the desert night pressing in on him. The memory of those empty eyes burned onto the backs of his eyelids. When he finally risked a glance in the rearview mirror, the road behind him was empty. But the cold remained. It had taken root in his cab, a permanent passenger, a chilling reminder of the abyss that had looked back at him from a pair of dead, hungry eyes. Listen carefully, because this is crucial. The entities of the road are not always monstrous in form. They are chameleons of sorrow. They wear the faces of our deepest regrets and whisper our most secret shames. The woman Javier saw was not just a ghost. She was a manifestation of the road's consciousness, a lure cast from his own soul. It used his loneliness as a beacon and his grief as a key to unlock his defenses. That phantom hitchhiker is a story told in 1,000 variations at 1,000 truck stops, a modern folk tale. But the truth is, she is real. She is an echo, a psychic stain left on a place where countless moments of despair, fear, and solitude have been spilled like cheap oil. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? This incident was a crack in the mirror of Javier's reality. He finished his route, delivered his cargo, but he was a changed man. The comforting solitude of his cab had become a cage, each shadow a potential horror, each flicker of light in his mirror a returning specter. The road was no longer a simple stretch of pavement. It was a hunting ground, and he had been marked as prey. He started seeing things, a fleeting shape in the corner of his eye, a face in the static of a Rain Street window. The radio would cut out, replaced by a soft, mournful sigh that was immediately recognizable. The sweet, cloying scent of withered flowers would bloom in the cabin at the most random of moments, a harbinger of the encroaching dread. The road was teaching him a terrible lesson. You can never outrun the ghosts you carry inside you, because the world outside has ghosts of its own, and they are drawn to the scent of familiar pain. His fellow drivers noticed the change. The easy camaraderie at diners felt forced. His eyes were haunted, constantly scanning the darkness beyond the glow of the parking lot lights. He tried to tell his story once, to an old-timer named Gus, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten highways. Gus didn't laugh. He just stirred his coffee, looked Javier dead in the eye, and said, "Some things you see out there, you don't talk about. You just pray they forget you." But it hadn't forgotten Javier. It was toying with him. The climax of his haunting came a month later, on a rain-slicked highway in the Appalachian Mountains. The trees crowded the road, their branches like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. The rain was not cleansing. It was oppressive, turning the world outside his windows into a distorted, liquid nightmare. He rounded a sharp bend, and there she was again, not on the side of the road this time. She was standing in the middle of his lane. He slammed on the brakes, the massive truck jack knifing with a sound of tortured metal. It slid sideways, the trailer groaning, coming to a stop just inches from her. She hadn't moved. She just stood there, drenched and serene, that same cracked, sorrowful smile on her face. Then she raised a hand and pointed. Javier followed her gaze, past her, down the road. His blood turned to ice. 100 feet ahead, where the road curved out of sight around a cliff face, a bridge had collapsed. The rain-swollen river churned in the black canyon below. Had he not stopped, he would have plunged into that darkness without a moment's warning. He stared, breathless, at the chasm, then whipped his head back to the figure in the road. She was gone, vanished into the sheeting rain. There was no sound, no trace, just the hissing of his brakes, the drumming of the rain, and the deafening thunder of his own heart. Was she a warning, a guardian, or was it something more sinister, a predator showing him it could have taken him? A reminder of its power, a promise of a future reckoning. He never drove again. He sold his rig, the Devourer, for scrap. He couldn't bear to sit in that cab where the cold had taken root. He took a job in a warehouse, a place of solid walls and predictable routines, far from the whispers of the open road. But even now, on stormy nights, he swears he can smell the scent of wilted flowers on the wind. The highway had not taken his life, but it had taken something else. It had taken his peace. It had shown him the thinness of the veil, and left him forever looking over his shoulder, waiting for a shadow with empty eyes to step out of the rain. The road remembers its own, and its memory is long and unforgiving. Our journey now pulls us into a different current of the abyss, into the story of a driver named Marcus. Unlike Javier, Marcus was not running from a past. He was chasing a future, a young man, barely in his mid-20s, with a pregnant wife at home and a mountain of debt that cast a longer shadow than his own. He took the long-haul routes no one else wanted, the grueling, sleepless runs through the forgotten heartlands of the country. He saw the road as a proving ground, a challenge to be conquered through sheer will and an endless supply of caffeine. He believed in logic, in mechanics, in the tangible world of tonnage and deadlines. He had no time for ghost stories. He considered them the sad ramblings of lonely, overtired minds. His road took him through the winding two-lane blacktops of rural Ohio, a place where dying towns slump into the earth, and the cornfields at night seem to stretch into infinity. It was late, past the hour when the world feels sane. The only light for miles was the twin beams of his truck, cutting a tunnel through the oppressive, ink-black dark. He was fighting sleep, the white lines on the road blurring into a hypnotic trance. It was then that he saw the headlights in his rearview mirror. At first, it was a comfort, a silent companion in the vast emptiness. Another soldier of the road, sharing the lonely vigil. The lights were steady, keeping a respectful distance. For half an hour, they were his shadow. But then, a strange unease began to prickle at the back of Marcus's neck. The truck behind him was old. He could tell by the round, dim shape of its headlights. It was a classic model, a Peterbilt or a Kenworth from a bygone era, the kind you see in dusty photographs, not on the road. And it was silent. He strained his ears over the roar of his own engine, but he could hear no corresponding rumble from behind. It was impossible. A truck of that size, of that age, should have been a symphony of rattling metal and thunderous exhaust. Yet it moved with the silence of a shark cutting through water. It was just there, a phantom presence glued to his bumper. Marcus tapped his brakes, a signal for the other driver to pass. The old truck did not respond. It maintained its exact distance, its dim lights unblinking. He sped up, It matched his speed instantly. He slowed down. It mirrored him perfectly. A cold knot of fear began to tighten in his stomach. This was no longer a companion. It was a pursuer. He tried his CB radio, his voice tight. "Hey, eastbound, 18-wheeler, you got a copy?" The only reply was a burst of static that crackled and spat like a dying fire. The static seemed to form a pattern, a rhythm, almost like a low guttural laugh, before fading back into a hiss. Now the fear was real and sharp. He was being hunted. He pushed his rig faster, the engine screaming in protest. The winding road became a blur of trees and darkness. He glanced in the mirror again, his heart leaping into his throat. The old truck was gaining on him. It pulled into the oncoming lane, its dim lights suddenly flaring with an intense, sickly yellow brilliance. It was not trying to pass. It was pulling alongside him. Marcus could see the driver's cabin now, a silhouette against the malevolent glow. The shape was wrong. It was too tall, too thin. Its posture unnaturally rigid, and there was something else. Where the driver's face should have been, there was only a deeper darkness, a void that seemed to drink the light. The pursuit had become a terrifying, silent race on a road to nowhere. As the phantom truck drew level, Marcus felt a pressure building in his cab, a physical weight of absolute malevolence. The air grew thick, vibrating with an inaudible hum that made his teeth ache. The temperature dropped so fast, he could see his breath plume in front of him. The windows of his truck began to frost over from the eye inside. He risked a sideways glance. The driver of the other truck turned its head, and for a fraction of a second, the yellow light from its dashboard illuminated the void. There was no face. There was only a swirling vortex of shadow, and in its center, 2 points of burning red light, like the dying embers of a forge. They were eyes filled with an ancient predatory hunger. The world for Marcus shrank to that single, impossible sight. He yanked the wheel, a primal scream tearing from his lungs. His truck swerved onto the gravel shoulder, kicking up stones and dirt. The phantom rig did not react. It continued straight, its yellow lights cutting through the darkness, its impossible silence, a deafening roar in his mind. It simply drove on, fading into the night, as if it were a projection on a screen that had just been turned off. Marcus fought for control, wrestling his truck back onto the asphalt, his body trembling uncontrollably. He pulled over, the engine idling, the only sound in a world that had become terrifyingly still. He sat there for a long time, the frost slowly melting from his windows. The memory of those red eyes burned into his soul. He had seen the truth. The road has its own traffic, and not all of it is human. What Marcus encountered was not a ghost in the traditional sense. It was a residual haunting of a different kind. Think of the highway as a magnetic tape, constantly recording. It records joy, hope, and commerce, but it also records violence, tragedy, and rage. A fatal accident, an act of brutal desperation, a moment of pure, unadulterated terror. These things leave a scar, an energetic imprint on the fabric of the place. The phantom truck was one such scar, a loop of psychic energy condemned to replay its final violent moments for eternity. It was not intelligent in the way we understand it. It was a memory with teeth, a predator made of pure, negative emotion, forever hunting the same stretch of road where it met its end. This is a warning whispered on the cold wind that blows across these empty spaces. The past is never truly dead. It lies dormant, like dried blood on the pavement, waiting for the right conditions, the right time of night, the right level of exhaustion, the right flicker of fear in a passing soul to reanimate and play out its nightmare once more. The logical mind of Marcus was a fortress, but the phantom truck was a siege engine that logic could not repel. It bypassed his reason and attacked his primal fear. It showed him that the rules he lived by were a fragile construct, and that just beyond the reach of his headlights lay a world governed by much older, darker laws. Every soul that joins us here feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Let them know you are listening. Marcus was never the same. He finished the run, but the swagger of youthful confidence was gone, replaced by a haunted, furtive caution. He started carrying a crucifix in his cab, a Saint Christopher's medal hanging from his rearview mirror, talismans against a darkness he now knew was terrifyingly real. He avoided that stretch of Ohio highway, even if it meant adding hours to his journey. He couldn't risk it. He couldn't risk seeing those dim, round headlights appear in his mirror again. He had a family to protect, a future he was no longer so sure he could outrun the past to reach. The road was no longer a challenge to be conquered. It was a beast to be placated, a dragon to be crept past in the dead of night. The experience opened a door in his mind he could never again close. He started listening to the old-timers at the truck stops, not with skepticism, but with a grim understanding. He heard tales of shadow people darting across the interstate in the Utah salt flats, of strange, time-lapsing fog banks in West Virginia, of disembodied voices chattering on dead CB channels. He was now part of a secret fraternity, the brotherhood of those who had seen what lies in the deep end of the night. He had paid the price of admission with his own terror. His belief in a purely mechanical world was the first casualty in his personal war against the shadows that haunt the asphalt arteries of the nation. Our third story is not one of a fleeting specter or a phantom pursuer. It is a story of a place that should not exist, a trap made of asphalt and memory, baited for the weary and the lost. The driver's name was Owl, a veteran of the road for over 30 years. He had seen it all, or so he thought. Blizzards in the Rockies, flash floods in Texas, riots in Los Angeles. He was a man grounded in the harsh reality of logistics and road closures. His truck was his kingdom, and the Atlas was his Bible. He trusted his maps, his GPS, and the decades of instinct honed by millions of miles. But the road he found himself on one night was not on any map. He was hauling a load of produce through the dense, tangled forests of Northern California, a region steeped in legends of lost miners and strange creatures. A massive wildfire had forced a detour, sending him down a series of rural state highways he had never traveled. His GPS was struggling, its signal flickering in and out. He was relying on old-fashioned road signs, which were becoming increasingly scarce and weathered. The sun had set, and a thick, unnatural fog rolled in from the woods, swallowing the road, muffling all sound. It was like driving through cotton. His world was reduced to the 20 feet of pavement, illuminated by his fog lights. It was in this disorienting soup that he saw the sign. It was a simple, hand-painted wooden sign nailed to an old oak tree. It read, "Blackwood Creek. Gas eats." All was low on fuel, and his stomach was rumbling. The town wasn't on his map, but in this fog, he was willing to take a chance. He turned onto the indicated side road, a narrow lane of cracked asphalt that plunged even deeper into the woods. The fog seemed to thicken here, clinging to his truck like a living thing. After a few miles, lights appeared ahead, faint and hazy. A town, or the ghost of one. It was a single street, lined with buildings that looked like they were plucked from a forgotten photograph. A general store with a fading Coca-Cola sign, a diner with a single flickering neon light, and a gas station with two ancient round-topped pumps. There was not a single person in sight. No cars parked on the street, no movement behind the windows. The only sound was the low hum of his own engine and the drip of condensation from the trees. An overwhelming sense of wrongness washed over Alf as the air was heavy, still, and smelled of wood smoke and damp soil. He pulled up to the gas station, the gravel crunching unnervingly loud in the silence. The pumps looked like museum pieces, but the sign said, "Open." He honked his horn. Nothing. He was about to leave, to write this off as a dead town, when the door to the station creaked open. A man emerged, a tall, gaunt figure in oil-stained overalls, his face lost in the shadows of a wide-brimmed hat. The man moved without a sound, gliding over the gravel. He didn't speak, just took the nozzle and began to fill Al's tank. Al tried to make small talk, his voice sounding thin and alien in the oppressive quiet. "Nasty fog tonight." The man just nodded slowly, his face still hidden. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. Al looked at the diner across the street. Through the window, he could see figures sitting at the counter, but they weren't moving. They were like mannequins, posed in attitudes of eating and talking, but utterly, unnervingly still. A cold dread, colder than any winter storm, began to seep into Al's bones. This place was not right. It was a stage set, and he had just wandered into the middle of the play. When the tank was full, the gaunt man simply tapped on the window. Eol held out his credit card. The man shook his head slowly. He pointed a long, bony finger at a sign on the pump that Eol hadn't noticed before. It read, "Payment in silver only." Eol stared bewildered. Who pays in silver coins in this day and age? He fumbled in his wallet, his hands shaking. He had no silver dollars. He offered the man all the cash he had. The figure just stood there, motionless, his shadowy head cocked to one side. Then he slowly raised his other hand and pointed again, not at the pump, but at Eol's passenger seat. Lying there was a small silver locket with a picture of his late wife, a keepsake he had carried for 20 years. He was being asked to pay with a memory. That was the moment the veil was torn completely. The wrongness of the place crystallized into active, malevolent intent. This was not a town. It was a toll booth. Al slammed the truck into gear, his heart exploding in his chest. He didn't care about the gas. He just had to get out. As he peeled away from the station, he glanced back. The gaunt man was standing exactly where he had been, but his head was now tilted up, and in the red glow of Al's taillights, he saw the man's face for the first time. It was a fleshless skull, its empty sockets staring after him. The figures in the diner had turned in unison, their mannequin-like faces pressed against the glass, their painted smiles seeming to widen into silent screams. He was escaping a town of the dead. He fled down the narrow road, the fog clawing at his windshield. In his rearview mirror, the lights of Blackwood Creek did not recede. They just blinked out. One moment, they were there. The next, only impenetrable darkness. He drove until his truck sputtered to a stop. The tank he had just filled, now mysteriously empty. He was stranded on the side of the main highway. The fog was gone. The sky was clear, filled with stars. The side road he had taken, it wasn't there. There was only a solid wall of ancient, impenetrable forest. There was no sign, no turn-off, no trace that Blackwood Creek had ever existed. It was a nightmare he had driven through, a place that had opened up just for him and then closed again. Places like Blackwood Creek are not on any map because they are not made of dirt and wood. They are constructs of will and memory. They are pockets of reality that have slipped out of time, existing in a perpetual twilight. The legends call them brigadoons, but the truth is far darker. They are traps, like the pitcher plants of the supernatural world, luring in the lost and the weary with promises of comfort and sustenance, only to feed on their energy, their emotions, their very memories. The price of entry is confusion. The price of exit is a piece of your soul. A Watts was asked to pay with a locket, a vessel of his love and grief. What would have happened if he had? Would he have been allowed to leave, but with a hollow space in his heart where his wife's memory used to be? Or would he have taken a seat inside the diner, becoming another still, silent patron for eternity? These phantom settlements are warnings. They are evidence that the world is not as solid as we believe. There are cracks in the foundation, thin places where the border between what is and what was has worn away. The road, especially a lonely, forgotten road, acts as a conduit to these places. It connects not just towns, but realities. Al's 30 years of experience meant nothing when he drove off the map of the known world. He survived because his instinct, the animal part of him that senses a predator, screamed louder than his rational mind's desire for fuel and food. He understood, in that final, terrifying moment, that some debts are too high to pay. And this is where everything changes for you, when you realize the world has teeth, and sometimes it smiles. Al never spoke of Blackwood Creek in detail, not to anyone. How could he? How could he explain a town that was, and then wasn't? How could he describe the soul-deep emptiness he saw in the skull face of the attendant, or the silent, accusing stares of the diner's permanent residents? He would just shake his head and mutter about bad fog and tricks of the light. But his eyes told a different story. They held the look of a man who has peered over the edge of a cliff and seen that the bottom is not rock, but an endless, waiting darkness. He had learned the most terrible truth of the road. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can find in the middle of nowhere is not an empty tank, but a helping hand. Our fourth story takes us to the desolate, windswept plains of Wyoming, where the sky is a brutal, empty canvas, and the wind is a constant, mournful voice. This is the tale of Ray, a driver who hauled not goods, but other trucks. He drove a massive flatbed rig, carrying the broken-down bodies of his brethren to distant repair shops. He was, in a way, a ferryman for the dead, a Charon of the interstate. He was a quiet, solitary man, comfortable with the silence of his cab and the company of the inert machines he carried. He thought he had a professional distance from the strange tales of the road. He was just a mechanic, a tow man. The ghosts, he reasoned, were for the cargo haulers, the ones carrying the weight of the world. He was on a late-night run, carrying the wreck of a tanker that had overturned. The cab was mangled, a testament to a violent end. Ray tried not to think about the driver who had died in that twisted metal. It was bad luck. He focused on the hum of his tires, the glow of his dashboard, the vast and lonely emptiness of the Wyoming night. The moon was a sliver, offering no comfort. He was utterly alone. Or so he believed. He was fiddling with his radio, searching for a signal in the static, when a new sound broke the monotony. It was faint at first, a rhythmic tapping, T-T-T-T tap, 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 tap. He turned the radio off. The sound was still there. He listened, his senses on high alert. It was coming from behind him, from the flatbed, from the wrecked tanker he was hauling. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like someone was knocking, trying to get his attention. His logical mind raced for an explanation. A loose piece of metal flapping in the wind, a branch scraping against the frame. But the rhythm was too deliberate, too regular. It was the sound of a human hand. A cold sweat broke out on his brow. The cab of the wrecked truck was less than 20 feet behind his own. The cab where a man had died only yesterday. He gripped the steering wheel, his gaze flicking nervously to the rearview mirror. He could see the silhouette of the wreck, a dark, mangled shape against the star-dusted sky. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, filled with a heavy, expectant dread. Ray forced himself to breathe, to calm his racing heart. It was the wind. It had to be the wind. He was tired. His mind was playing tricks on him. He was a professional, not some spooked rookie. He fixed his eyes on the road ahead. Then, a new sound began. It was a voice, a whisper, right behind his head. It was so close, he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. The voice was ragged, weak, choked with a sound like wet gravel. "Help me," it rasped. Ray let out an involuntary cry, swerving slightly. He was alone, in the cab. The doors were locked, the windows were up, but the voice had been right there, in the cab with him. He slammed on the brakes, his massive rig groaning to a halt in the middle of the deserted highway. He didn't know what else to do. Fleeing seemed impossible. Where would he go? He was a tiny island of light in an ocean of darkness. He sat, frozen, his body trembling, listening to the thundering of his own blood in his ears. The whispering started again, no longer behind him, but all around him. It seemed to be coming from the very metal of his truck. "So cold," the voice gasped. "Can't get out." Ray's mind fractured. He was hauling a coffin, and the occupant was awake. The man who died in the tanker, he was still there, and he was talking to him, summoning a reserve of courage he didn't know he possessed. Ray grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from his door pocket and threw open his cab door. He was going to face this. He was going to prove his mind was playing tricks on him. He jumped to the ground, the wind whipping at him, and crept towards the back of his rig. His heart was a drumbeat of terror. He shone the beam of light onto the wrecked tanker. The mangled door of the cab was hanging from a single hinge. The windshield was a spiderweb of shattered glass. He moved closer, his hand shaking so badly the beam of light danced and trembled. He pointed the light inside the driver's side of the wreck. It was empty, a mess of twisted metal, torn upholstery, and broken glass. But it was empty. He let out a shaky breath of relief. It was all in his head, the exhaustion, the solitude, the grim nature of his cargo. It had all conspired to create a waking nightmare. He was about to turn away when his light caught something on the inside of the shattered windshield. Words scrawled in the dust and grime. He leaned closer to read them. The message was simple, written in shaky, desperate letters, as if by a trembling finger. It said, "Help me." Ray stumbled back, a scream lodging in his throat. The words were fresh. They hadn't been there when he'd loaded the wreck. The tapping, the whispers, the plea for help, they were real. He wasn't hauling a wrecked truck. He was hauling a trapped soul. The entities tied to objects, especially objects of great trauma, are some of the most potent and tragic. A vehicle where a life was violently extinguished becomes a cage, a vessel for the confused and terrified spirit left behind. The soul, ripped from its body without warning, clings to the last thing it knew, the metal and glass that became its tomb. Ray wasn't just a tow truck driver that night. He was an unwilling medium. His proximity, his solitude, his focused energy on the wreck all served as a beacon, allowing the trapped spirit to gather enough strength to make its presence known. It wasn't trying to harm him. It was simply a desperate, fading echo reaching out from an eternity of cold and confusion, begging for release. What the stars don't tell you openly is that we are all conduits. Our bodies are receivers, and when we are tired, lonely, or afraid, our frequency changes. We become attuned to the whispers that normally exist just below the threshold of our perception. Ray, the pragmatist, was forced to confront the reality that the world is layered, and that death is not an ending, but a change of state. The spirit in the tanker was caught between layers, unable to move on, forever trapped in the final moments of its terror. His experience serves as a chilling reminder that the objects we surround ourselves with have a history, a memory, and sometimes that memory can wake up and speak. Ray got back in his truck, but he did not drive away immediately. He sat in the profound Wyoming silence and did something he hadn't done in years. He prayed. He prayed for the soul of the unknown driver, for his peace, for his release from the mangled prison he was holding. He spoke to the emptiness, promising to take him to his destination, promising that he wasn't alone. As he spoke, he felt a change in the atmosphere of the cab, a subtle lifting of the oppressive cold, a quietening of the psychic static. He started the engine and pulled back onto the highway. The rest of the journey was silent. There were no more taps, no more whispers. He delivered the wreck to the salvage yard the next morning, the first rays of dawn feeling like a benediction. He never knew if his prayers had worked, but he never forgot the night he gave a ghost a ride. The final story I will share with you tonight is perhaps the most unsettling, for it deals not with ghosts or phantom places, but with the darkness that hides in plain sight, wearing a human face. It is a story about the chilling intersection of the mundane and the monstrous. It happened to a driver named Frank, a man as big and solid as the rig he drove. He was a father and a grandfather, a man who believed in the good of people, despite the grime he saw in roadside diners and truck stops. He saw his job as a noble one, part of the lifeblood of the country. He was a protector, a provider, and one night, that instinct to protect was twisted into a weapon against him. He was driving through the rain-lashed back roads of Louisiana, a place where the Spanish moss hangs from the trees like old men's beards, and the air is thick with the scent of decay and life. He was behind schedule, pushing through the storm to make a delivery in New Orleans. The rain was torrential, turning the road into a black mirror that reflected his headlights back at him. Up ahead, he saw the flashing lights of a car, spun out on the shoulder. A woman was standing beside it, waving her arms frantically, her face a mask of panic in the intermittent glare of the hazard lights. Frank was a good man. He couldn't just leave her there. He pulled his massive truck over, the hiss of his brakes cutting through the sound of the storm. He grabbed a flashlight and a rain slicker and went to help. The woman was soaked and shivering, nearly hysterical. She told him a frantic, jumbled story about a deer, a skid, a blown tire. She was alone. Her cell phone was dead, and she was terrified. She was young, probably college-aged, and Frank's fatherly instincts kicked in hard. He saw his own daughter in her frightened eyes. He told her not to worry, that he would call for a tow truck from his cab, and she could wait with him where it was warm and dry. She looked at him with an expression of such profound gratitude and relief that it warmed him against the chill of the rain. She followed him to his truck, and he helped her up into the passenger seat. He got her a blanket and a hot coffee from his thermos. He got on the CB, reporting the accident and her location. A local sheriff responded, saying they would dispatch a tow truck, but it might be a while due to the storm. Frank told the girl to just relax, that everything would be all right. They sat in the warm, rumbling cab, a small island of safety in the raging storm. They made small talk. She told him she was a student at Tulane, driving home for the weekend. She was bright, charming, and her fear seemed to be melting away, replaced by a friendly chatter. Frank felt good. He had done the right thing. He had helped someone in need. The cab felt less lonely with her presence. It was about 20 minutes later that the first pinprick of unease surfaced. She was telling him about her major, art history, and her hand gestures were becoming more and more animated. As she talked, the blanket slipped from her shoulders. On her forearm, Frank saw a tattoo. It was a strange, jagged symbol, like a stylized broken cross inside a circle. It was dark, almost black, and it looked crudely done, like a prison tattoo. It seemed utterly out of place on this clean-cut college student. He tried to dismiss it, but the image snagged in his mind. It felt wrong. It radiated a quiet malevolence that contradicted her bright smile and easy conversation. But what could he say? He pushed the feeling down. Then, the sheriff came back on the radio. His voice was tense. 18-wheeler. What was your location again? The vehicle you reported isn't showing up on our system. There's no registered car spun out on that stretch of highway. Frank's blood ran cold. He looked at the girl. Her smile had vanished. Her face was calm, her eyes watchful and intelligent, but utterly devoid of the warmth they had held moments before. It was like a mask had dropped. The charming, frightened college student was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating stranger. "Who are you?" Frank asked, his voice a low growl. The woman didn't answer. She just slowly, deliberately, reached into her oversized purse. The truth is, some predators do not have claws or fangs. They have smiles and stories of distress. The open road is a perfect hunting ground, not just for supernatural entities, but for the human ones as well. They exploit the inherent loneliness and the code of honor among drivers. They use kindness as a lure and compassion as a key to get inside the locked doors of their victims. Frank, in his desire to be a protector, had willingly invited the wolf into his sanctuary. The disabled car, the frantic story, the dead cell phone. It was all a script, a carefully rehearsed play designed to disarm a man like him. And it had worked perfectly. He was trapped in a small enclosed space with a monster he had mistaken for a lost lamb. Now, imagine this. You are miles from anywhere, in a metal box, and you realize the person sitting next to you is not what they seem. The storm outside is nothing compared to the storm of terror and adrenaline exploding inside you. Every instinct is screaming at you to fight or flee, but you are strapped into a seat, a behemoth of a machine at your command that is useless in this intimate, terrifying confrontation. This is the ultimate violation. The trust that holds the lonely world of the road together has been shattered. Frank was not just fighting for his life. He was fighting against the poison of an act that sought to turn his own goodness into his tombstone. The broken cross on her arm was not just a tattoo. It was a brand, the sigil of a philosophy that sees kindness as a weakness to be exploited. The woman pulled her hand from her purse. She was not holding a weapon. She was holding a small, antique-looking tape recorder. She pressed the play button. A voice filled the cab, a distorted, gravelly man's voice, speaking in a slow, hypnotic cadence. It was saying his name, over and over. Frank, Frank, Frank. Then it began to speak of things it had no way of knowing. It spoke of his wife's illness, of the argument he'd had with his son, of the secret fear he harbored that he was getting too old for this job. It was a litany of his deepest anxieties, spoken in a dead, emotionless tone. The woman just watched him, her eyes cold and clinical, a faint, cruel smile playing on her lips. It was a psychological assault of the highest order. Frank felt his reality begin to fray at the edges. The voice from the recorder was weaving a web of dread around him, paralyzing him. He felt his strength draining away, his will to fight dissolving into a sea of his own fears. This was their method. They didn't need a knife or a gun. They used your own soul as a weapon against you. But as the voice mentioned his granddaughter, a picture of her smiling face flashed in Frank's mind, and something inside him snapped. A primal, protective rage surged through him, burning away the hypnotic fear. With a roar, he lunged across the console, not at the woman, but at the tape recorder. He snatched it from her hand and threw it against the windshield, where it shattered into pieces. The voice died. The silence that rushed in was deafening. The woman looked at him, her cold composure finally breaking. There was a flicker of surprise, of fury in her eyes. She had not expected this. She had expected him to crumble. She lunged at him, her nails like claws. But Frank was ready. He was a big man, and his rage had given him the strength of a bear. He shoved her back against the passenger door, unbuckled his seatbelt, and threw his own door open, scrambling out into the raging storm. He didn't run. He turned, ready to pull her out of his truck, ready to fight for his life. But she was already gone. He looked down the road, and in a flash of lightning, he saw her running, impossibly fast, towards a dark sedan parked in the shadows 100 yards down the road. It had been there the whole time. A trap. He stood in the rain, his heart pounding, as the sedan's lights flashed on, and it sped away into the darkness. He was alone again. He climbed back into his cab, his hands shaking, his body drenched in cold. He looked at the passenger seat. The blanket and the coffee mug were there, but on the floor, where the tape recorder had shattered, there was nothing, not a single piece of plastic or metal. It had vanished, as if it had never been. The disabled car on the shoulder was also gone. There was no trace of the encounter. Only the mud on his boots and the terror coiling in his gut proved it had been real. He had encountered something far older and more sinister than a simple roadside criminal. Frank drove straight to the next truck stop and called the police from a payphone. He told them everything. They listened patiently, but he could hear the skepticism in their voices. A girl, a tattoo, a magic tape recorder that knew his secrets and then vanished. They sent a patrol car to check the area, but of course, they found nothing. To them, it was just another story from another tired, lonely trucker, his mind playing tricks on him in the deep of the night. But Frank knew what he had experienced. It was a brush with a kind of evil that doesn't leave evidence, an evil that feeds on fear and despair. He quit driving a week later. He couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't look at a stranger in need without seeing those cold, dead eyes and the shadow of a broken cross. The road had been his life, but now it was a place of ghosts, both spectral and all too human. These are the whispers I have gathered for you, echoes from the long, dark throat of the highway. They are more than mere stories to curdle the blood. They are maps of a territory that exists alongside our own, a world of shadows and echoes that bleeds through in the lonely hours. The road is a liminal space, a place that is neither here nor there, a river of asphalt that flows between the shores of the known and the unknown. The men who travel it are its unwilling witnesses, its accidental shamans. They see the tears in the fabric of reality because they spend their lives tracing the seams. They are closer to the veil than any of us, and sometimes the veil whispers back. Remember Javier, who was offered a ride by his own grief. Remember Marcus, who was hunted by a memory with teeth. Remember Al, who found a town that feeds on souls. Remember Ray, who became a ferryman for the dead. And remember Frank, who learned that the most terrifying monsters are the ones who know how to smile. Their experiences are not isolated incidents. They are points of light, or perhaps darkness, that illuminate a vast and unsettling pattern. They are a testament to the fact that we are not alone, and that our belief that we have tamed the wild spaces of the world is the ultimate, most dangerous form of hubris. The concrete and the steel are just a thin veneer over something much older and much wilder. The next time you find yourself on a deserted highway at night, the only soul for miles, pay attention. Listen to the hum of your own engine, and then listen deeper. Listen to the wind as it whips past your windows. Does it carry a voice? Look at the shadows cast by your headlights. Do they move when they shouldn't? Feel the solitude and ask yourself if it is truly empty or if it is just waiting. The road is watching, the road is listening, and the road remembers. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Let the shadows in the comments know that you have heard their call. Every soul that joins this congregation feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Let your presence be a beacon for others who wander in the night. Until the next vision, travel safely, and do not, under any circumstances, stop for strangers.